In this lesson, I wanted us to practice identifying variables and their levels in some passages about some research studies, because this is one area that I find that students in research methods courses tend to really struggle with. So we will go through 3 different examples, and in each example, we will look for the 2 variables of interest, identify which one is the causal variable and which one is the response variable, and then identify the different levels of each variable. Okay, let's look at example number 1. Clinical psychologists who study neurodegenerative disorders such as Alzheimer's and Huntington's diseases know that patients with these diseases suffer memory loss as the diseases progress. In order to determine whether the amount of memory loss is similar for these 2 groups of patients, the Famous Faces and Public Events Recall questionnaire was given to patients. The psychologists asked patients to identify pictures of famous people and to answer questions about well-known news, sports, political, and entertainment events from the decades of the 1940s, 1950s, the 60s, 70s, and 1980s. The number of people and events that each patient correctly recalled from each decade was then recorded, and the number of events that the Alzheimer's patients remembered was compared to the number of events that the Huntington's patients remembered. What I would like you to do is to go ahead and pause the video, read through this passage, and identify and write down the 2 variables of interest. Make sure that you really do this. Really do get a piece of paper and a pen and write down what you think the 2 variables of interest are. Trust me, you will learn this better if you actually write down your answers. Even if you feel like you're guessing, making that prediction and writing it down will help you learn this better. So go ahead and pause the video and only resume it once you have written your 2 variables down. Okay, so what did you write down for your 2 variables? Let's go ahead and start with the causal variable. Looking at our passage, we can see that psychologists are interested in the cause that type of neurodegenerative disorder has on memory for people and events. So our causal variable is neurodegenerative disorder, with Alzheimer's and Huntington's disease being our 2 levels of our variable. Now, what about the outcome variable? So we know that the suspected cause is neurodegenerative disorder type, and we believe that this will have an effect on memory for people and events. So our outcome variable, therefore, is specifically the number of people and events, with our levels of that variable being the number of correctly identified items. In other words, a score on our Famous Faces and Public Events Recall questionnaire. All right, now that we have that one under our belt, let's take a look at a second example. An educational psychologist was interested in whether a new supplemental algebra training program was really improving students' math grades. Half of an 8th grade class had signed up for the algebra program in addition to the regular math curriculum that all 8th graders received. At the end of the year, the psychologists gave all of the 8th grade students a standardized math assessment and compared the scores of the students who took the algebra program to the scores of the students who did not take the algebra program. All right, go ahead and pause the video while you look through this passage and identify the 2 variables. All right, so which variable did you identify as the causal variable? Well, the educational psychologist was interested in seeing if he could improve the math scores of 8th graders if they took this supplemental algebra training program. So in that case, our causal variable is the supplemental algebra training program, and our 2 levels of that variable would be completing the program or not completing the program. So which variable did you identify as the outcome variable or the response variable? Well, because our educational psychologist was looking to see if the scores on the standardized math assessment were different in one group of students versus the other group of students, then we know that our outcome or our response variable is score on the standardized math assessment. And our levels of this variable would be the possible score on the assessment. Okay, let's look at our third example. A nursing home wanted to reduce the prevalence of depression in its patients. It decided to bring in some therapy dogs on a weekly basis to see if the animal therapy would help. After 6 months of the animal therapy, the nursing home found that the proportion of patients taking medication for depression dropped from 30% to 15%. Okay, you know the drill. Go ahead and pause the video and identify the two variables in this passage. Okay, let's see what variables you identified. What did you identify as the causal variable? So the nursing home thought that perhaps dog therapy would cause a reduction in depression. So our causal variable in this case would be the dog therapy. And our levels for this variable would be before the dog therapy and after the dog therapy. And what did you identify as the outcome variable? So our outcome or our response variable is depression. And specifically in this study, depression was measured as the proportion of patients taking medication for depression. So technically that is our variable, proportion of patients taking medication for depression. And our levels of that variable would be the percentage, basically the proportion. All right, hopefully you feel a little bit more comfortable about identifying variables and their levels than you did before this video.